Solid-state batteries and their effect on silver. You wanted more? Here's part 2. There's a story circulating right now on the internet, and you've probably seen it somewhere between a YouTube short and a trading forum at 2 a.m. It goes like this. Silver is about to be consumed by the EV revolution. Solid-state batteries are going to use massive amounts of it. The supply won't be enough. Prices will explode into the thousands of dollars per ounce. Entire institutions will be forced to reprice reality. And underneath it all is this implied idea that something hidden is happening, that the system already knows, that insiders are already positioned, that the clock is quietly ticking towards a kind of industrial shortage event. It's a compelling story, and it's also mostly wrong in the details. But here's the uncomfortable part. The conclusion people are reaching isn't entirely crazy. It's just coming from the wrong mechanism. And if you fix the mechanism, what you get is something more interesting than the hype cycle. You get a real structural shift in industrial demand. Just not the one people think. And so let's walk through this, but carefully. Because silver is one of those rare assets where myth and reality are constantly trying to merge into the same price chart. First, the narrative everyone wants to believe. The popular version of the story is simple. Electric vehicles are scaling, batteries are changing, new chemistry is coming, and silver is suddenly the bottleneck. It sounds clean, almost poetic. A metal we've used for coins, jewelry, and monetary systems for thousands of years suddenly becomes the limiting reagent in electrification. And then the leap happens. If EVs scale fast enough, silver gets used up. And if silver gets used up, price has to go vertical. That is the mental model. But industrial metals don't work like crypto supply shocks or meme stock squeezes. They don't disappear. They reroute. They substitute, they recycle, they respond. So if we want to understand silver, we have to stop thinking in terms of apocalyptic curves and start thinking in terms of engineering systems. So what silver actually does in the real economy, silver is not and has not been a bulk structural material for energy storage. It is, however, one of the most conductive elements on Earth. So what does that mean in practice? It means silver shows up anywhere electrons need to move efficiently. Electrical contacts, switches and relays, circuit boards, power electronics, solar panel conductive paste, high reliability industrial systems. In other words, silver is not the battery. Silver is the nervous system. And that distinction is what matters. Because when people say EV will consume silver, they are imagining silver being embedded inside the energy storage core. But that's not where it goes. It goes around the system, in the infrastructure that controls, regulates, routes, and converts energy. That's very different. Demand curve. Slower, broader, less expensive, less explosive, but persistent. The solid state confusion. Let's talk about the second part of the narrative, solid-state batteries. Solid-state batteries are real. They are important, and they are one of the most actively developed next-generation battery technologies. But here's what they actually are. Instead of using a liquid electrolyte like conventional lithium-ion batteries, they use a solid electrolyte, ceramic, or surface-based materials to improve safety, energy density, and potentially cycle life. So what they are not is silver-based energy storage systems. There is no mainstream solid-state architecture where silver becomes the primary storage material. The real bottlenecks are lithium metal stability, dendrite formation, interface engineering between solid layers, and manufacturability at scale. Not silver supply. So when you hear claims that EV adoption plus solid-state batteries will consume global silver supply, what you're not hearing is a narrative collision between two unrelated transitions, the lithium-ion battery revolution and the industrial electrification of everything else. They are both real. They just don't intersect in the way the viral version claims. So where does silver demand actually come from? This is where it gets interesting, because silver demand is actually accelerating. not just in a dramatic singular bottleneck event. Instead, it's coming from three compounding systems. First, solar expansion. Photovoltaic technology uses silver paste in conductive layers. As solar scales globally, silver demand rises with it, not explosively per panel, but meaningfully at global scale. Second, electrification of everything. EVs don't just use batteries, they use inverters, onboard chargers, switching systems, sensors, high-frequency control units, to name a few. Each of those systems uses small but non-trivial amounts of silver. Multiply that by tens of millions of vehicles per year, it adds up. And third, data and AI infrastructure. This is the least discussed driver. Modern data centers are power dense, heat dense, and electrically complex. And silver appears in high reliability connectors, thermal and conductive systems, switching components, again to name a few. Not dominant per unit, but at scale, it adds up. So the real constraint is not demand, it's elasticity. Here's what most people miss when they talk about silver. The silver market is relatively small compared to the scale of industrial demand it is being asked to support over time. Annual global silver supply is measured in tens of thousands of tons. That sounds large until you realize you are layering it against global electrification, solar expansion, digital infrastructure growth, emerging robotics, and automation systems. So the real question is not, will silver run out? The question is, how does the system respond when a critical conductive material becomes structurally tighter over a 10 or 20 year horizon? And the answer is substitution. Copper, aluminum, or some use cases. Efficiency improvements, so less silver per unit, recycling expansion, and gradual price repricing, and a sudden discontinuity. The pricing myth, why $5,000 silver narratives keep appearing, is whenever a commodity becomes emotionally charged, people start modeling exponential price scenarios. Silver is especially prone to this because it sits at the intersection of monetary nostalgia, industrial necessity, supply skepticism. But industrial pricing does not jump to absurd equilibrium levels until there is no substitute, demand is inelastic, and supply is fixed in the short term. Silver fails all three tests today. There are substitutes, demand is partially elastic, and supply responds to price over time. So while silver can absolutely move, and will, into higher structural ranges under sustained deficit conditions, the idea of a clean, deterministic, battery-driven super spike is not how commodity systems typically behave. They grind, they reprice gradually, they surprise in cycles, but not verticals. So the real silver thesis, stripped of mythology, is if you remove the noise, the actual investment case for silver looks like this. Silver is a dual-purpose metal, industrial input into electrification and monetary hedge against macro instability. Both useful, good use cases. That combination matters, influenced by two separate forces. Real economy expansion, which is industrial demand, and financial system sentiment, which is investment demand. While those align, when industrial demand rises at the same time capital rotates into hard assets, silver can and does outperform dramatically, but not because it's being consumed by EV batteries specifically, because it's being pulled simultaneously by structural electrification and macro hedging behavior, both of which we're starting to see now and have for the last couple of years. So where does it actually matter for silver? Here's the subtle link between what people are trying to reach but getting wrong. Solid state batteries matter for safety improvements in EVs, energy density increases, long-term cost reduction, and manufacturing transformation. If they succeed, EV adoption accelerates. And if EV adoption accelerates, well then, grid expansion accelerates, renewable deployment accelerates, and electronics proliferation accelerates. And those systems use silver. So silver is not tied to battery chemistry. It's tied to electrification of the entire system around the battery. And that's the correct causal chain. It is slower, broader, and more durable than a viral version. And so the conclusion, here's what makes this interesting. The internet version of the silver story is wrong in almost every technical detail, but it is trying to describe something real, that the physical economy is becoming more electrically dense, more connected, more dependent on conductive materials. And silver, because of its unmatched conductivity, is an important part of that system, not as a bottleneck apocalypse metal, but as a quiet constraint in a world that is scaling electrical complexity faster than it is scaling raw material supply. That is not crisis narrative. It is an engineering narrative. And materials tend to misprice engineering narratives for a long time until they don't. So my final thought, silver is not about to be used up by batteries soon. Not about to be used up by batteries that don't exist in the way people describe them yet. But it's also not just a relic metal of coins and jewelry. It sits in an unusual category. A small market, a critical function, a scaling global demand base. And those combinations tend to produce volatility over time, not because of conspiracy or sudden shortages, but because the system adjusting to physical constraints is never smooth. It's incremental until it isn't. And that is where the real story is. Not in the fantasy of instant scarcity, but in the slow compounding realization that electrification, real electrification, not narrative electrification, always has a material footprint. And silver is a big part of that footprint. And now you know the rest of that story. iBankerU, build that stack. Good day.